God, I still see his face sometimes when I close my eyes. It's not the face of a dog, not just a canine partner, but my best friend, my brother. The muzzle full of white hairs, the slightly droopy ears, the way he always nudged my hand for one last scratch before a deployment. I carry the weight of that day with me every single moment. I remember the cold concrete floor, the stench of oil and stale sweat, and the sound of the gunfire. That terrifying final sound. Before I tell you everything, before I take you through the 2 years that led to that moment, I have to ask you this. Was I wrong to hold on to him so tightly in the end? Or was I right to let the whole world know the price he paid for me? Tell me truly if you would have done the same thing. I want to take you back, way back to when I first met Titan. It wasn't in some heroic training montage you see in movies. It was in a sterile, brightly lit kennel facility. I had been a K-9 officer for 5 years, and my previous partner, a wonderful but aging German shepherd named Rex, had just retired. I felt a huge void, a kind of professional loneliness that only another dog can fill in this job. I was looking for a replacement, a dog with the right balance of drive, intelligence, and honestly a little bit of sass. And then I saw Titan. He was a Belgian Malinois, lean, powerful, with eyes that seemed to hold a profound, almost human understanding. He wasn't barking or jumping. He was observing me, head slightly tilted, his body coiled with suppressed energy. I remember the trainer telling me, "He's too much dog for most handlers, officer. Too smart, too independent. He needs a true partnership, not just an owner." I took that as a challenge. I spent the next hour just sitting by his run, not talking, just letting him watch me. When I finally stood up to leave, he put his large, dark paw right under the steel barrier. And that was it. He chose me. Our initial training was brutal, but not in the way you might think. Physically, he was a machine. Tracking, apprehension, narcotics detection, he excelled at it all. But mentally, he tested me every single day. He wouldn't just follow a command. He would analyze it. If I asked him to hold a position in an uncomfortable spot, he'd give me a look that clearly said, "Is this really necessary?" Our bond was forged not through dominance, but through mutual respect and endless hours of repetition. I learned to read the slightest twitch of his ear, the subtle shift in his tail position, which could mean the difference between a successful search and a dangerous situation. He learned to trust my judgment even when his instincts screamed otherwise. He wasn't just my partner. He was my shadow, my co-pilot, my nonverbal confessor. He lived with me, of course, dominating the backseat of my patrol car, and often hogging the best spot on my couch. My wife Sarah initially saw him as competition, but even she fell in love with his goofy off-duty persona, the way he'd army crawl for belly rubs or sing along to the radio with his low, mournful howl. Our career together was marked by success after success. Titan had a nose for drugs and a relentless tracking ability that made him the stuff of legend in the precinct. We found missing persons who were given up for lost and apprehended violent suspects who thought they could outrun the law. But it wasn't the big headline moments that truly defined our bond. It was the quiet ones, the freezing nights spent searching a dark forest, where I'd put my glove on his thick fur just to feel the warmth of his life force. The moments in the car, lights flashing, sirens wailing, where he'd look back at me in the rearview mirror and I knew we were a single, unstoppable unit. He was my confidence, my second set of eyes, and my early warning system, all wrapped up in a powerful four-legged package. It's funny, the things you rely on. I relied on the sight of his powerful silhouette ahead of me in the dark, knowing that if danger came, he would meet it first. Then came the night everything changed. It was a cold, wet Tuesday. We got a call about a break-in at an industrial park. Not unusual, maybe a copper thief or some petty vandalism. But as soon as we pulled up, the hair on my arm stood up. The silence was too deep, the air too heavy. The building was a massive, abandoned fabrication plant, a labyrinth of steel girders, old machinery, and shadows. The initial responding officers had found a back door ajar and evidence of forced entry, but no sign of anyone inside. That's where we came in. My job was to do a clearing search, a high-risk, high-stakes game of hide-and-seek with a potentially armed and desperate criminal. I strapped on my vest, checked my weapon, and clipped the lead to Titan's collar. I remember looking down at him. His body was tight, his head up, his ears swiveling, taking in 1,000 pieces of auditory information that I couldn't perceive. He knew this wasn't routine. I squeezed his neck and whispered the same thing I always did. "Be safe, buddy. Let's go to work." We moved through the factory room by room, our flashlight beam cutting through the gloom and the dust motes. The air was thick with the smell of rust and something else. A faint, metallic, unpleasant scent that Titan immediately picked up on. His movements changed. He stopped the casual, deliberate pacing and began to stalk, low to the ground, his tail now rigid. His sniffs were sharp, rapid bursts. I followed him into a cavernous area that looked like a loading dock. Stacks of ruined crates provided perfect cover. I gave the command, low and clear, "Search." Titan instantly went off leash, a black and tan blur, disappearing behind a towering stack of wooden pallets. I kept my hand on my sidearm, my adrenaline spiking. The metallic scent was stronger here. Titan reappeared briefly, looking back at me. A silent confirmation. He's here. I rounded the corner of the crates, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. And that's when I saw it, not the suspect, but the reason for the unsettling feeling. A large pool of dark, thick blood on the concrete floor, half hidden by a discarded tarp. This wasn't a petty thief. This was something much worse. I barely had time to register the gravity of the situation, to raise my radio to call it in, when the air exploded with noise. A figure burst from the shadows near a heavy-duty press machine, a man wild-eyed and clearly injured, and in his hand was not just a tool, but a handgun. He didn't hesitate. He leveled the weapon and fired. So that's the situation I was in, gunfire echoing in a massive enclosed space. An armed, cornered, and clearly desperate man and me exposed with nowhere to go. My training took over, but the choice I had to make was instinctual, a reaction rooted in 2 years of life-or-death reliance on this animal. Before I tell you what happened next, before I describe the climax of that terrifying standoff and the final, unbelievable act of devotion, I want you to pause right now and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have prioritized your own cover? Would you have hesitated to give the order? I need to know if others would have made the same impossible choice. The first shot missed me by inches, hitting the concrete wall just behind my head, sending a shower of dust and stone fragments into the air. I instinctively dropped to one knee, trying to get behind the meager cover of the wooden crates, but I was too late. He had the sight picture, and he was ready to fire again. In that microsecond, as my brain screamed danger and my body reacted to take cover, Titan moved. He didn't wait for my command. He saw the threat, he saw the barrel pointed at me, and he did what he was trained to do, what he was bred to do, but with a ferocity and speed I had never witnessed. He launched himself, not at the man's arm, but directly at his torso, a massive, powerful projectile of muscle and teeth, a canine missile aimed to incapacitate. The man flinched, his aim spoiled, and the second shot went wild, embedding itself harmlessly in the ceiling. But the third shot didn't miss. It wasn't intended for me anymore. As Titan's powerful jaws locked onto the man's arm, forcing him to drop the weapon with a pained scream, the man reacted with pure malice and panic. He drew a small illegal backup piece, a Derringer I later learned, from his coat pocket and fired point-blank into Titan's side, right behind his shoulder. The sound was muffled by the dog's powerful body and the heavy breathing, but the impact was sickeningly clear. Titan didn't yelp. He didn't even whine. He let out a deep, guttural grunt, a sound of profound effort and pain, but his grip didn't waver. He held on, preventing the man from bringing the second weapon back up to bear. That was my opening. That was the moment he bought for me. My own gun was already out, my sights aligned, and I fired. The suspect dropped. The silence that followed was deafening, a thick, smothering blanket over the ringing in my ears. I scrambled forward, my eyes locked on the fallen suspect, ensuring the threat was neutralized, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo. Once I was sure, I rushed to Titan. He had released his bite and collapsed, not aggressively but gently, almost as if he was lying down to rest after a long day. The light in the factory was terrible, but I could see the dark, crimson stain spreading rapidly across his beautiful, thick coat. I dropped my weapon, ripped off my gloves, and cradled his head in my lap, my hands immediately finding the sticky, slick warmth of the wound. Titan. Oh God, Titan, stay with me, buddy. Stay with me, I pleaded, my voice breaking. The professional, hardened officer completely dissolved into a desperate, heartbroken friend. His breathing was shallow, ragged, and wet. His dark, intelligent eyes flickered up to mine. They weren't panicked or scared. They were calm, accepting. He gave my hand a weak lick, a final, familiar gesture of comfort, not for him but for me. I held him tightly, pressing my body against his, trying to staunch the impossible flow of blood with my bare hands, knowing in my gut it was futile. The paramedics were minutes away, but I knew those minutes were too long. He had given me his all, every ounce of his strength, his training, and his love. He had taken the bullet that was meant for me. The last thing I saw in his eyes was a flicker, a gentle warmth, and then, slowly, agonizingly, the light went out. He let out a final soft sigh, his body relaxing completely against mine. In the noise of the arriving sirens, the shouts of the other officers, the flashing lights, all I could hear was the sudden, awful absence of his breathing. I sat there on the cold, concrete floor for what felt like an eternity, holding the limp body of the truest hero I had ever known. I didn't care about the crime scene, the evidence, or the formality. I just held him, whispering thank yous and apologies into his unmoving ear, tears streaming down my face. I realized then that my job wasn't just to catch criminals. It was to protect my partner, and in the end, he had been the one to protect me. The aftermath was a blur of paperwork, investigation, and overwhelming grief. The man I had shot survived and was taken into custody, facing multiple charges, including the attempted murder of an officer. But none of that mattered to me. My focus was on Titan. The department offered a quiet, private cremation, a standard procedure. I refused. Absolutely refused. I insisted on a full police funeral with honors. I wanted the whole world to know his name, his sacrifice. I wanted every officer, every citizen to understand the depth of the bond we share and the price paid for their safety. I was told it was unprecedented for a K9 to have such an elaborate ceremony, that it would be too emotional, too dramatic. I didn't care. I stood my ground. He took a bullet for me. I remember telling the chief, my voice shaking but firm. He saved my life. You will honor him as a true hero, or I will stand here and tell every reporter why you won't. They agreed. The day of the service was somber and overwhelming. Police dogs from all over the state, their handlers in full uniform, lined the procession route. The hearse carrying his body was flanked by a full police motorcade. The church was packed. I stood at the podium, my uniform pressed, my voice steady, but my heart shattered. I didn't talk about his arrests or his records. I talked about the goofy Malinois who would try to sleep under the covers, who would bring me his favorite squeaky toy when I was having a bad day, who was utterly and completely my best friend. I talked about the instant he launched himself without command, knowing the bullet meant for me would hit him instead. I placed his badge, the one I had custom made for him, engraved with his name and my initials on top of his casket. A final salute. It shook everyone. Tough, seasoned officers openly wept. The community poured out their grief, leaving flowers, toys, and heartfelt letters for weeks. His bravery became a rallying cry, a defining moment for our department. He wasn't just a dog. He was a legend, and I made sure his story was told not for my own glory but for his. The moral of the story, the thing I carry with me every day, is this. Heroism isn't always a conscious choice. Sometimes it's an unbreakable bond acted out in a split second of selfless devotion. My life now is quieter, and I've had to be reassigned to a different unit for a time. The patrol car feels empty. My couch feels empty. But my heart is full of the memory of a fierce, loving, and incredibly brave Belgian Malinois who proved that loyalty is the greatest form of courage. I know I will never ever have a partner like Titan again. I live my life now in a way that honors his sacrifice, trying to be the best man and officer I can be, because he made a trade that day, and I'm determined to make his sacrifice worth it. His legacy is etched not just in my memory, but in the halls of our police department, and in the hearts of everyone who heard his story. Like this video if you were on my side, if you believe that Titan should be remembered as the true hero he was. Subscribe for more stories like this where I share the raw, emotional, and often shocking truth of life on the force and the incredible partnerships that sustain us. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Tell me how you feel about the sacrifices our K9 partners make. I'll see you all in the next story.